Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's time for our next panel discussion. I believe we managed to gather some fantastic insights from our first set of panelists. And with that, let's take the trend forward as we gather more insights and more nuggets of perspectives from all of our thought leaders joining us this morning. In fact, the theme for our next panel discussion is about responsible AI. Putting AI at the core of an organization business and operating models. A very pertinent and a very, very interesting topic coming your way. So let's also get in all our speakers online, and let me quickly introduce our set of panelists for all of you. In fact, spearheading this panel discussion, we have with us Dr. Rahul Ghosh, Vice President, AI Research and Services, Amex AI Labs, Global Decision Science and Data Strategy, American Express. He comes with more than 14 years of professional experience spanning across various roles. And he also comes with a strong technical expertise in the areas of ML and AI products, platforms, cloud, and big data. Joining him, we have with us our set of panelists here, Mr. Prakash Ramurthy, Director AI ML, Zoho Corp. He's been leading the AI efforts at Zoho Corporation, and he kickstarted the AI efforts within the company and also built the company's AI platform from the scratch. We're also joined by Ms. Tannistha Ganguly, Global Head Procurement IT Delivery, Kimberly-Clark India Private Limited. She's a senior management professional with over 16 years of experience in global industries. We also have with us Ms. Nidhi Pratapneni, Senior Vice President, Product Analytics and Modeling, Wells Fargo, an astute leader with over 24 years of multifaceted experience. In fact, before joining Wells Fargo, she's also worked across some amazing set of organizations. With that, let's also move forward and invite our next set of panelists. We have with us Mr. Manoj, Jagani, Head RPA Tools and Platforms, Sony India Software Center Private Limited, a dynamic PMP and agile project management professional who comes with more than 17 years of expertise in planning strategy and spearheading innovation across the IT domain. Moving forward, let's bring on board our next set of leaders. We have with us Mr. Haryyaksha Ghosh, Chief Data Officer, Aadhar Housing Finance Limited. He's donned leadership roles in various organizations for close to 2 decades in research, analytics, and technology. Our next speaker is Mr. Tridib Mukherjee, Vice President, AI and Data Science, Games 24/7 Private Limited. He's a senior leader with more than 2 decades of experience, and he defines and drives the AI and data science strategy in Play Games 24/7 across products and business verticals. We also have with us Mr. Sanjay Thawakar, Corporate Vice President and Head AI Works, Max Life Insurance Company Limited, who comes with a prolific experience of more than 14 years of analytics, consulting experience, specializing in design and execution of tactical and strategic analytical solutions. And our final panelist for this fabulous discussion, we have with us Mr. Milind Mungale, Executive Vice President and CISO, NSDL E-Governance Infrastructure Limited. He's a senior leader with more than 30 years of IT industry experience, and he comes with a combination of manufacturing and financial sector experience in the IT domain. So as you can take a look at some of our amazing leaders who come with diverse experience, it's time to get an understanding on responsible AI. So let's bring on board our set of speakers and let the discussion begin right now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on responsible AI. We all know that AI use cases are proliferating every day, and as a result, using AI responsibly is becoming increasingly important. But what does it really mean? Responsible AI is a big word, right? So that's where we will pivot our conversation. I'll start with Prakash from Zoho. So Prakash, what is at stake, if an organization doesn't adopt responsible AI practices? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Great question, Rahul. Thank you. So I think responsible AI is something that has been looked upon in the recent years, because there is a huge awareness on the kind of data we create and how businesses consume them to build. And we have built huge successful business models around privacy, right? So we don't pay for our search engine, we don't pay for our social networks. So instead, it so happens that we give back our private data, and we get those services for free, and it's a $1 trillion business model. So responsible AI or responsible technology is going to be at the heart of every business. So it's not like it is something that is optional, and companies only that are doing probably hiring, banks offering loans. Responsible AI is not just in their ambit. It is across, even though you do something as trivial as a service desk, right? So you need to build in responsible AI. Even though you build some AI for customer ticket prioritization, you need to build in with responsibility. So responsible AI has to be one of the key strategies in every organization's AI strategy. So I would say missing out on responsible AI is going to be a very, very, very difficult problem to solve. It is not something that money can solve. It's going to be a reputational problem that is going to cause a huge impact on how your organization is going to do business in the near future and in most of the future. So I would say organizations have to put responsibility, not just in AI, in all of digital technologies, as one of the first checkpoints when building digital tools. So that would be my point, Rahul.
Absolutely. I think you touched on very important points here. It's a reputational risk that's really at stake. Nidhi, would love to hear your thoughts, from the banking and financial services domain.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. And agree with you completely, Ram Prakash. It is AI is permeating all aspects of the organization. And when you think of analytics, you sort of feel that, okay, AI is the purview of the analysts and the technologists. But when you talk of responsible AI, you're talking about ethics, essentially, and how ethics flows down from the top of the organization. It needs to permeate every aspect. And earlier, a data analyst used to basically mine data without thinking of the responsibility aspect of it. But now that has to be, infused within the way we train our analysts on just the way you code. It's how do you code ethically? How do you code responsibly to when you leverage AI in any aspect of the business? And it's going to be, from the minutest to the big impact things. AI is going to be part of, so many different processes, but the responsibilities associated with it and how you monitor when AI goes wrong will necessitate, the operating models to change significantly.
Great. I think, both Ram and Nidhi, you have touched upon quite a few important points here, but I think from a principle standpoint, also, we need to think about responsible AI, right? How do we develop such principles? How do we operationalize such principles? Milind, would love to hear your views, how an organization should develop or operationalize such principles around responsible AI.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you, my co-panelists and Mr. Ghosh, also the audience. Nice to be here on this panel today afternoon. A very interesting question, Rahul. First and foremost thing, any technology is a double-edged sword. It can be used either ways. And any technology, whether it will be used in a positive way or a negative way, is depending on in whose hand that technology is. A gun in the hand of a policeman and a gun in the hand of a criminal is used differently. Someone uses it to protect and someone uses it to destroy. So from that point of view, carrying the same analogy to artificial intelligence or AI, I think responsible AI is the positive side of using this technology. And there's a very, very thin line. You would never know when you cross the line in a rush of a business or in a rush of a market delivery. And hence, being very aware of what you're using the technology for and how you are deploying it is what, according to me, is a responsible AI. And the principle should be that the technology that we deploy should be primarily to support and help our stakeholders, our customers. When we talk from the point of view of AI, I would like to just draw upon a bit of a serious topic over here. How many people really understand AI so far? An algorithmic logical program behind something is also termed as AI nowadays. Whereas the true AI is something which would act on its own and which would be able to take some decisions on behalf of the human being. And that is where the responsible AI comes into the picture. I am from the security background, so I would like to touch upon a very different topic over here just to start with. And that is one of the incidences I read 2 days back was that someone used voice synthesizing technology along with an artificial intelligence combination and instructed some bank to transfer some $4 million to some bank in US. And that poor guy transferred it. So when it comes to talking about AI, the usage in this manner is not responsible AI. Whereas when you address a problem of an end user, especially during the times when situation like COVID comes and people are not available on their desks, on their phone, especially in the help desk or in the call center. At that time, if you can aid AI technology over there to help the end user and ease out their trouble, I think that is the responsible AI. So the principle I would say to summarize is, one is, when we say responsible AI, the first principle is we should understand what the responsibility is in using this technology. The second principle is that it should always be for the benefit of the consumer of this technology, not the person who is deploying the technology, but the focus should be on who's consuming this particular technology. And third is that utmost importance and utmost focus has to be given for the security of the consumer of this particular technology.
Absolutely. Thank you, Milind. I think security is indeed an important, pillar for responsible AI, and we all need to keep the stakeholders in mind while crafting these principles as well as operationalizing in the context of an organization. Manoj, I will go to you next. If you could share your thoughts in the form of principles, or how do you operationalize this in an institute or organization?
Sure. Thanks, Rahul. I think it's nicely poised that we are starting with the principles, because without principles you can't have AI, or rather responsible AI. And when we are talking about responsible AI, the word responsible matters a lot, because AI, though we are talking about AI as an artificial intelligence, but since we as a human are building, we need to have certain principles around it to make it more responsible. And those could be related to increasing the trust, having more transparency, fairness, auditability. All these things are supposed to be key factors, or rather key part of your responsible AI. And that is nowadays growing importance within all the organizations. I'll quickly talk about the 5 principles which I think should be included in your responsible AI part. First is your fairness and bias. Okay, we need to ensure that your system is made in fair way, and it does not harm people, or it does not it is not inequitable system which is kind of being biased. Though we know that in data we put some sort of biasness, but then it does not bias the decisions. Second part which I would like to talk about is the trust and transparency. Okay, we all know that AI systems, you only see the output, but then business does not know what is inside. Those, we call it as in black boxes in our term, right? So that is something which has to be more transparent for end user or the business or whoever is going to be the stakeholder to know that how it is being developed or done. Third part, which I would talk about, is related to accountability. As you know, that all these systems will have your data providers, data labelers, technology providers, you will have system integrators, all these things are there. But then someone will have to take accountability of the system. Someone should be the owner around it. Another, or rather more beneficial, I would say, principle would be to have social benefit, because you can do a lot of good to the society. For example, in recent times for COVID-19 vaccine, a lot of companies were using AI to actually develop a vaccine, and that is something you're doing greater good to the society. So it should somewhere give benefit, or rather would be good for people or society. And the most important part, the fifth one, is your privacy and security. So how you are maintaining the privacy, because you're dealing with a lot of data, and that data involves a lot of personal as well as private information. So how are you dealing with that data, and how your security around the data is being built, and how you are governing it, because you know that a lot of countries, rather the regions, have their own data handling legal setup. Like, for example, GDPR is there, CCPA is there, a lot of things where you can't actually publish certain things out, and that's why a lot of companies get into the trouble. So ensuring that you are maintaining the privacy and security is also important. So I feel that if we are able to follow these 4 or 5 principles, when we are setting up the responsible AI, we could actually take a leap forward onto rather better AI, which would kind of give benefit at the end of the day without harming anyone.
Great. Thank you, Manoj. I think that was very comprehensive overview of the principles for responsible AI. I think from the overall principles and the themes, let's get a little bit more real in terms of practice, like how we can make this happen on the ground. And as you have touched upon, one of the core aspect of responsible AI is transparency or explainability. So my next question will be to you, Haryyaksha. What are some of the current trends that you are observing when it comes to transparency or explainability of AI?
So see, when we are talking about transparency and explainability of AI models, we are looking at end to end in terms of what kind of data has gone inside building of the AI model. Second is how the AI model was developed in the first place, what kind of parameters were used for the AI model, or let's say in English terms, what kind of variables. And the third one is, how the output of the AI models were interpreted, and essentially based on the mathematical interpretation, how it has been made explainable to the normal business audience. So, as a part of the financial services industry, so I represent Aadhar Housing Finance Limited. HFCs in India are, as of now, not regulated by any regulatory body in terms of model explainability. But on the contrary, banks have been regulated for a very long time. So any AI model that is developed, let's say for credit underwriting processes in banks, these have to be explainable. These has to be interpretable in terms of what kind of parameters have gone in. But within the other elements of financial services industry, we are also seeing that model explainability is becoming important. So and typically, when you are looking at, let's say, fairness as a critical part of the responsible AI practices or pillars, any AI model should not be discriminatory towards a certain section of population. Now, when we are looking at the financial services industry, of course, there's a commercial element to it. So if I'm disbursing a loan, I should make sure that whoever I am giving a loan to is able to pay it off or pay it back. So, from an AI model perspective, I am trying to dissociate between who is a good customer versus a bad customer. But in terms of being fair, it should not, discriminate towards be discriminatory towards any community or religion that, I stop giving loans to someone of a specific community. So from that perspective, to be fair, the explainability aspects of models definitely do come in. And when we were, even evaluating the different model automation or model deployment platforms, I am seeing that almost all the platforms across the world, be it, developed in India, be it developed across the world internationally, all of them are bringing in the certain components of model explainability into their folder.
Great. I think you touched on quite a few interesting topics across multiple domains, and one of the key thing that you have called out here is how a model is developed and what sorts of data and parameters that were used to develop such model. So I'll pivot my next question on that, and Tannistha, it will be for you. We all know that data is central to AI, right? Without data, there is no AI. So tell us your thoughts about promoting this responsible AI through ethical use of data.
Thanks, Rahul. And a very good afternoon to the audience and my co-panelists. So Rahul, I think one of the key points of responsible AI, key pillars is data. like co-panelists have already mentioned. That's where the ethical use of data comes and plays a big role, because end of the day, any model we build, end of the day, it is going to use the data, and the data that we gather, that we collect, that we store, and we use for these models, the training of these models. End of the day, how do we look at this data, gather? These are the really big factor that becomes important and plays a big role in which, in which way we use the responsible AI. So responsible use of data or ethical use of data has become equally important as you are building AI systems in your system, right? So a couple of points I think is very important that we need to consider is, what are the parameters at which, or factors that we should consider, right? The ownership of the data. I think Manoj touched upon quite a few here, right? Ownership of the data. Who takes the ownership of the data that we are collecting, right? Are we really being transparent? The transparency with the end customer. Today, we are gathering data from so many different sources, whether it is our end customers, whether it is our suppliers, whether it is our general market, structured, unstructured data. So when we are picking up this kind of data, using it for our business use cases, for example, right? Are we being fair and transparent to the end users, saying that we are collecting this data, and are we being letting them know that we are collecting the data from you? These are to a lot extent have been governed through regulations, though varying from country to country or region to region, but such regulations do exist. And that is also becoming a part of how we are being ethical when we are handling the data from outside sources. One key important part is, especially it comes into play, is the privacy data. When we gather PIIs, right, personally identifiable information, the onus really comes on to the businesses, right? And the intention of gathering the data, I think, becomes a lot more important. What is the intention that we are gathering the data for? And if I can draw the term intention to a business case or a use case, what is the use case we are building an AI for? And what is the data that we are using in that use case? That's where we, as a responsible company, we should be careful, right? Sometimes it's not just the data that we are gathering, but what data to gather and what not to gather. That also becomes important. For example, if I'm a company which is selling, I have a website and I have products on my website. There are cases when, as a company, I take a business strategy that I will not sell directly through my website, but I will redirect my end customer to sell through an e-commerce. I'll have a contract with the e-commerce companies. Why? Because I really don't want to collect and store credit card information, for example, or banking information, financial information of the data. So I am de-risking my entire data gathering process for myself. So these kind of de-risking or decisions that we take at a business level in order to ensure that we are being transparent, fair when we are collecting data, and also we are making clear of our intentions, looping back to our business strategies.
Sure. Thank you, Tannistha. Sanjay, would love to hear your thoughts on use of data for driving responsible AI. Sanjay, can you hear us? Okay. Sanjay might be facing some issues, so we'll move on and let Sanjay join back. So I think we heard that there are quite a few stakeholders who are involved while driving the agenda of responsible AI. We talked about customers, we talked about suppliers, and so on. So my next question would be on the stakeholders, because they do play an important role for the success of responsible AI. So Tridib, my next question will be to you. As we are seeing that responsible AI is becoming a multidisciplinary topic, in your opinion, who all are the key stakeholders who should be on point for driving such an agenda?
Sure. Thanks, Rahul, and hello, everybody. Good afternoon. And as my co-panelists have already touched upon quite a bit of a point, an important point, right, in terms of how the stakeholders play a hugely important role in driving or channelizing the technological optimism, if I may call it, right, from around AI in the proper direction. And I think from that perspective, in an organizational setup, right, it's as multidisciplinary as it can be, right? First of all, the business and the product teams should have the proper vision in terms of short-sightedness versus long-sightedness, right? And it really depends on how exactly you are trying to utilize the AI as a tool, right, as a technology for solving your business use cases, right? So you can be short-sighted, for example, like, okay, I have some business objective, right, or some business metric to optimize towards, right? I want to maximize my revenue or the engagement or whatever it is, right? And that might be driven by a very select set of users, right, in your business, right? So whatever model you build, right, no matter as an AI practitioner how much you want to be responsible about, right, it will always be trying to optimize that objective, and it will inherently get biased towards that particular section which is driving that business metric, right? So but that's a very short-sighted way of solving the problem, and it's definitely not responsible, right? So now you have to think of like how you can be thinking long term, right? There might be multiple things that can happen, right? First of all, your user base might change over time, right? So whatever is good for you today might actually change over time. So it's actually a bad thing from the business perspective also to not being responsible and try to maximize in a short-term perspective. So that's number one. And number two is, of course, in order to, there is always this trade-off, right? I think my co-panelists mentioned about explainability and transparency. There is always this trade-off between that and how much accuracy you want to achieve as a AI model or whatever it is, right? Now, of course, a short-sighted thought process could be like, I don't care. I want to maximize my immediate accuracy and all of that, right? But then, what are you going to do with that? You can predict somebody is not going to be engaged in your platform, but you need to know, right, what are we going to do about it, right? That information, that prediction is not going to be useful unless you have the explanation, even if it takes a hit in your accuracy a little bit to reach that trade-off point. So I think the business stakeholders need to be sensitized, and I think the AI leadership has a huge role to play over here to make them understand that, actually going responsible route is good for the business as well, right? It's not either or, it's not negotiable from that perspective, right? It's actually going to be a win-win, from all of that perspective, right? So I think from an organizational hierarchy point of view and business objective point of view, I think everybody has a role to play over here, including the organizational culture, because you need to be able to incentivize or penalize, or reward your ecosystem, right, your employee ecosystem accordingly towards moving towards responsibility while being business optimized. So I just wanted to make that point out.
Sure, I think great set of interesting points, Tridib. I think gamification does play an important role in terms of incentivizing the right set of stakeholders, driving awareness, education. Sanjay, welcome back. So wanted to get your thoughts as well, as we are looking at variety of stakeholders in this space, right from data collection through model building and so on. What are your thoughts in terms of who all are the key stakeholders and how they can help drive the agenda of responsible AI?
Thank you, Dr. Rahul, and good afternoon, everyone. So when we talk about the key stakeholders for driving responsible AI, I think so everyone is involved, right from the business to the particular person who is collecting data, to the modeling team, the team which is being involved. Because see, I think so, each of my co-panelists have spoken about it, how important is the fact that that the AI has to be fair, it has to be responsible, and we have to have it in explainable. So the whole fundamental thing is, when you look at this in isolation, there's a very good likelihood that this entire agenda can be dropped. See, for example, if you pick up a particular person who is collecting data and he's thinking in his silos, and my job is just to collect data, or I have to make this particular data available, and the data scientist is thinking from his perspective that I want to make the best model. That's what it matters, and that's what is like Tridib was saying, that for him the entire thing is that my model has to be the best. It kind of achieves the set perspective accuracies, the precision levels, and so forth. And the business starts thinking that whether this is going to benefit me entirely, and I don't want to get into the black box. So this entire agenda is going to drop in. So what we actually do out here is that within our organization, that it's a joint responsibility. We put it in on the joint responsibility of the team which is building these models. They have to test out whether the data that is being leveraged, the data that is being used, how did we procure it? See, in today's world, like if you look at it, there are a lot of partners which comes in, there are a lot of vendors which come in, and they're going to start saying that this is the level of data that they have captured. So the first question that we need to ask is that whether this data is being captured, or the data that is being available is by the consent of the customer or not, or he was not even aware that this data has been captured from his behalf in a very what I would call is not so legal manners, which means that in a long list of terms and conditions they have just said that we're going to capture some data. So the entire idea is that how do we look at data, how is the generated, where exactly did we get the consent from the customer or not. Now post that, when we're building the entire model and everything, the question is how explainable it is going to be. And that's where the entire frameworks come into picture, which talks about that whether my entire model is making sense, is it going to be fair or not, is it is discrimination against this thing, what are the kind of variables that we are using, which can those variables be used for discrimination like caste or religion or certain of those things. So, and then there's an entire sign-off process whether these variables are making sense or not. And eventually I would say that where the important stakeholder importance also comes is from the business owner. If he is not going to ask the relevant questions, which means that how exactly, the score that you're giving me, how exactly this code is being generated, which all are the important parameters, somewhere this thing is going to drop in. So in my sense, I would believe that this is actually a joint responsibility of the team which is building it. They need to put in their checks and balances and a framework around it, and obviously the business team. But obviously, like I know in banks and everything, there is a third-party audit teams which also goes and checks for whether the models are making sense or not. So you can obviously have that kind of a scenario where you have a third-party team which is going to check for compliance and legal aspects as well.
Sure. Thank you, Sanjay. Yes, I think multiple levels of defense is definitely necessary before you put AI into works. We'll shift the gear here. We had been talking about how we can make responsible AI successful, but let's accept the fact that even with the best intention, sometimes things do go wrong. And that's where, we need to stand up and we need to see how we can take the right set of actions. So I'll go back to you, Ram Prakash, and would love to hear your thoughts, right? Like if you see that there are unintended behaviors of AI ML models that are running in production, from a responsible AI perspective, what kind of immediate or long-term actions should be taken?
Great question, Rahul. Like nobody wantedly plans an irresponsible behavior into their AI model. And the way these AI model works, they just look at huge amounts of data. And then there is a transition from a very deterministic way of doing things to a probabilistic way of doing things. And my co-panelist talked about identifying PII and all those details. But today, there are a lot of other indirect PII as well. For example, let's say with the zip code, you probably can narrow down the religion of a person, the community of a person, and so on, especially in smaller towns. So it's very important for an organization to deploy maximum levels of checks and processes to make sure that AI is responsible. For example, in our organization, we build AI for the IT for enterprises, and we have started treating data like code. The same way you have multiple access controls, the same way you have your version controls, the same way your code is actually milestoned for every release. The same way all our data metrics are monitored. They're monitored for change, because the first iteration is always easy, and then probably some 4 or 5 engineers start working on it, and then they bring in a lot of changes to it. That is when you tend to miss out on this whole idea of unbiased AI. The other option we do is to we call it shadow AI internally. Basically, let's say you are a bank, and in general, AI models are like 80% accurate. So basically, we have built an explainable model, and we deploy this AI model in parallel to the human. So basically, most of AI is trying to replace or augment humans who are working in, let's say, a loan department of a bank. Right. And you deploy the AI model parallelly and find your areas of strengths. Right. For example, if you know that your urban salaried class loan decisions are 90% comparable to your human decisions, then probably start deploying your AI model only for the urban salaried class. And if you know that your rural self-employed class, there is a lot of difference between the decision that the human takes and the decision that the AI model takes, then probably you need more and more training data to do it. Then have a separate process where you still continue with the human elements, and then eventually augment it with more data and see it. So once this, in case there is a mistake, something wrong happens, and it's going to bring in a lot of bad press, but the only way to defend it is a very easily worded privacy policy on what all data we collect, how do we process them, why do we need this data to process, and what are the implications. So having a very transparent privacy policy really helps. And of course, like my co-panelist said, user education, empathizing with the customer is going to play a lot of role when your AI goes wrong.
Great set of inputs. I think you touched upon quite a few points here. I definitely agree with you that segmentation of data and model often become key for resolving such situations. Nidhi, would love to hear from your vast experience. I'm pretty sure that you have encountered scenarios where things had not been deployed in the right way, or maybe did not go in the right manner. How would you advise to tackle such situations? What would you do?
So I think, when you go back to the first step, which is the data, and, we talk about models in production, and we also build challenger models, which are constantly testing. But at the same time, in addition to challenger models, the whole discipline of challenging the foundation of the model is also important, because, while we are looking at which data to use and how to use it, there is this element of what's the data we are not using that we should be using. If you look at segments of population that have been ignored in the past, that have not been served by a business, and it could be for a variety of reasons, could be due to certain biases, or that wasn't the business model. But we are moving towards a world where, those questions are being raised, and a model that has been in production, not challenging the key assumptions of that is also, will make it likely to become error prone, or at least you will be pulled up for not having factored those in, right? So the constant challenging, the bringing in very diverse perspectives to look at it from, the foundation of it is important. The next part is, what is your backup? An AI model can, why it fails, it could be a threat action, which could be similar to how you react in a cybersecurity kind of an environment, right? You know what to do immediately, but then there is the other aspect where there is a gradual deterioration. There are consequences of the model that you don't notice until it's too late. And especially if AI is being used for, say, in the field of radiology for detection, have you compromised on accuracy, or has the model sort of deteriorated in a way that it is misdiagnosing? And at what point do you detect it? So the systems that you need to build and your response mechanism. So the same way that, we had COVID and we had our incident management systems, which, needed to figure out how do you respond to it. Similarly, for our AI models, how do you respond when you get one red flag? Is it when you get two red flags? Is an orange flag enough, or does it have to be a really, a strong indicator that something went wrong? And so what do you put in place? Do you have a backup model that you switch to, if you identify such a thing and until you fix those things? So those are a lot of the processes that one needs to take into consideration when you're looking at failure of a model. And as some of our co-panelists mentioned, the ownership of the model, the responsibility becomes very important, because in the traditional world, we held profit and loss responsibility to be sort of primary. But now, when so much of that is also dependent, when your business models are dependent on the models that you're using, the ownership of the model and how that's being managed is also very critical. So, the challenging, the regulatory and compliance aspects, all of those play a huge role in just making sure that, the models are running the way they should.
Great. I think you touched upon quite a few proactive steps that any organizations should take, right? Be it independent challenge and validation, be it, making sure we have the right set of champion challengers model who can take it up eventually. And, in the beginning part of the panel, we have touched upon this, that when we drive such conversation of responsible AI, sometimes we get the pushback and we hear that we might be sacrificing on the model accuracy side, and that might be directly related to the business benefits as well, right? So I guess one thing to keep in mind is that we do need to drive the awareness and education while driving the agenda of responsible AI. So Manoj, I think I'll get back to you. How do you drive such conversation, right? So when there is a perception that responsible AI might become an obstacle to unleash the maximum potential of an AI/ML model, how do you drive such conversation within an organization?
Thanks, Rahul. I think this is a very common question which would come up whenever an organization is starting up the AI part, and they want to just see that how do I get a product? How do I get something which is running on the day one or a day two? They always think about the short goals, and I think one of our panelists mentioned about that. What are your short goals versus what are your long-term goals? You need to look into it. But I would like to put it from a point of view. There is a very famous line from one of the superhero movies which says that with great power comes great responsibility, right? So if you really look from that point of view, AI has huge potential. Okay, it has huge potential. If I really look maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, I'll see a lot of things happening. That we have autonomous cars, we have AI in medical areas where I think Nidhi touched upon about detecting cancer and all. So that is there. We have AI almost everywhere. I mean, wherever we are dealing in, whether it is forecasting, whether it is anything. So we know that there's a huge responsibility lies with the AI. Now, how do you actually ensure that this power is being tackled properly? And that is where you need to understand that AI becomes, or AI or ML model becomes your enabler, not your actually the output. Okay, so you need to think from the enabler point of view. Make it as an enabler. Use it as an enabler to come up with that. Okay, what is that I'm going to be delivering? And I think in many areas you have governed rules by governments itself, who are already mature in terms of understanding the AI part. So they have already given certain set of rules and governance. So if we can follow, or if we can align ourselves into that, I think we can have AI. I know it would be rather slower, but then, like they say that slow and steady wins the race. You need to ensure that you are steady. You are setting up all the parameters properly. You have your governance body in place in case you're preparing the COE around AI. So you have your governing body who actually takes care of everything, including your data, including your privacy, accountability, transparency. Everything is being taken care of by them. Then have your tech team who actually works on your technology area, where it is actually trying to come up with the model, and then you have governance which actually regulates those things out, that okay, whether it has been done properly, you audit it out, and then you actually productize it. So you need to ensure that you set everything out and then do the actual output. Not just start going ahead that maybe I'll develop a small algorithm, I'll do linear regression and come up with the forecast and see I have everything ready. Now that's not something which you actually want to do. You may be getting something done now, but then when you look from a long term, when you are growing your organization, when you're really looking into your vision or your vision document, or rather your future goal, you actually need to assess that you are here now and you need to reach there. So what are the steps you need to take, and how you create your foundation strong so that you can reach there in no time. Your start might be slower, but then the pace you will gather once your regulations, once your auditability is in place, you will be actually able to pace it fast later. So don't go by the short-term output or short-term goals. Rather plan it out and go for the vision which you actually are seeing 2 or 3 years down the line with the AI and its potential. So having responsible AI and making sure that business understands, you have certain level of understanding, communication, making them understand that how transparent it could be and how responsible it could be at the end when you are actually going to be deploying it.
Sure. I think this holistic view is very important. Milind, would you like to add your thoughts on this as well?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So what Manoj just said, I agree fully with him. But one more thing we must remember is that new technology, especially when we talk about new technologies like AI and responsible AI, they cannot be fully matured on day one when you deploy. It is an iterative process. So as when we deploy any such technology or any such use case, it is going to go through multiple iterations. Everyone is going to be new, including those who test and pass this particular thing, including those who audit it, including those who give business requirements. Everyone, for them, it is an experimentation phase. Like traditional software where a business guy would know exactly how he wants that whole thing to function, in AI, it is practically impossible for him to carve out all the use cases, all the desired results and provide it. So he will also start with what he can provide and get done. The testing person will also not be able to create all the test conditions at one go, because for them they are not in a position to imagine all possible combinations. So last feedback will come from the actual user, and that is when the user will be able to use it and provide his feedback, saying that whether the desired result has been obtained or not. So from that point of view, there are going to be multiple iterations. So as much as we say we would like a responsible AI to come in the market and win the whole market and create a kind of a model which will pioneer for a particular organization, the responsible AI itself means being responsible in giving out such a product which uses responsible AI. So I think we should give time. As much as business and market would be in hurry of using it, it would be necessary for everyone to understand that whatever time is required to mature this in an organization, that should be given, and that is where the long-term success will be there. Because if we keep only short-term success in mind, it is possible that it can create a very major dent to the organization's reputation if something goes wrong. And the entire program would come to a standstill even before it takes off. That's what I would like to add to what Manoj said.
Sure. Thank you, Milind. I think we are reiterating the fact that it's really the reputational risk that is at stake if we don't do this right. I know we are almost top of the hour, so we'll try to conclude this session with some final remarks. So Tannistha, I'll go back to you and would like to get your advice for our audience as they are gearing up for adopting responsible AI, in their organization.
Thanks, Rahul. So Rahul, I think one aspect that comes to me as a very important point when any company wants to take in as AI and implement AI, I think it all starts with the company itself. And when I say company, it's the people itself, right? What I mean by that, are we as a company, are we having the awareness and how are we ethically conducting our business? It all starts from there, our core code of conduct, for example, that we call in our companies, right? So the awareness is where we build. How do we today deal with our various business processes, whether it's our hiring process or whether it's our vendor selection process, based on our it all, are we ourselves building that awareness within our companies, within our employees? That is where it's AI starts. Like Manoj said, AI or any technology for that matter is only an enabler, right? Today, our businesses, to them, AI is a black box that does magic. To many of our business stakeholders, that is how AI is portrayed, or that is how they seem. But the real responsibility lies with the team who are implementing such projects, right? For us to ensure that the team is aware of the dangers and also of the consequences of building such enabling technology. I think that is where the awareness building of the team is important. And how do we do it? There are many companies who do it differently. So, we already touched upon building a governance model, building awarenesses, trainings for our team members. These are the things that I know, some of the steps that we should start with and implement within our companies when we are taking in projects, or we are initiating projects using AI and other technologies, right? So that's something I would, harp multiple times for people who are starting such projects or initiatives.
Great. Haryyaksha, would you like to add your thoughts?
Sure. So just to add on to what Tannistha just mentioned, I will also take a few examples of what happens when AI goes wrong. So back then, when the first set of vending machines came up in the market, there were cases, where African Americans, when they were putting out their hands for the soap dispenser, the dispenser couldn't recognize that this is a hand, and that was because when the algorithm or the AI model was created, it was not fed with non-Caucasian data. Similarly, let's say when the first facial recognition systems were coming to Asia, the facial recognition systems found it very hard in terms of recognizing Asian faces, because when the products were developed, these were tested on Caucasian subjects. So one of the key pillars of responsible AI being fairness, it means that you have to collect enough data to ensure that you are not discriminating against groups. Imagine if the company is facing legal suits or a negative media reviews because of these kind of cases of where AI goes wrong. So from an organizational point of view, the organization needs to be very clear before going in the journey of implementing a responsible AI governance mechanism, is that what they define as their sense of fairness, what the AI models that, or the AI systems that are being rolled out, how do they measure the element of fairness? What are the organizational goals? What are their benchmarks of fairness? On the other hand, as we already discussed, that AI algorithms are always very data hungry. So the more data you feed, the more accurate they can predict. But then again, what kind of data you're collecting, what kind of data you're processing, what kind of data you're using to run the AI algorithms becomes important also. So the first step of any responsible AI journey is for the organization to kind of decide or create a framework, a governance structure in terms of these elements of fairness, kind of data, transparency, etc. The guardrails based on which the responsible AI should be rolled out. The second point is, how the change, because this is a change management exercise. It percolates throughout the entire system because it has got far cascading, far-reaching repercussions. So the second part is, let's say, how do you decide, let's say, what kind of, from an operational standpoint, how this will be rolled out. So cross-functional teams, cross-functional expertise, what kind of teams should be involved. We discussed that, it again percolates across multiple functions. So let's say the data science teams or the AI developing teams, the technology teams, the marketing teams, which typically use external data, all the relevant teams should be taken into, taken into a steering committee, or the set of teams which are rolling out the responsible AI framework. The third will be on the technical side. which is how you are developing the algorithms, the data science teams, whether they are adequately trained to understand what responsible AI means, what kind of data they should use, what kind of data they should use as control, which means that they should ensure that these kind of attributes are not used, or these kind of attributes are used to balance out and to ensure that the systems don't discriminate. And the fourth will be on the review mechanism, which is, once you have rolled out a responsible AI framework, how is it being kind of productionized? Whether, what kind of key groups are getting discriminated, or, the sense of fairness is not prevailing, whether the model is stable or not, whether the data that was kind of acquired, the source of data has, got stopped. So for example, in between there was SMS scraping that had come up, where a lot of financial companies were using SMS data to disburse loans to companies. Now this is not a sustainable manner, and then Google quickly came and kind of intervened. So whether you are using this kind of data, whether the model was developed using this kind of data, whether the model is stable or not, all these things in terms of review. So these will be the, let's say, the 3 or 4 steps of rolling a responsible AI framework within a company, as per my view.
Thank you, Haryyaksha. I think clearly it takes an ecosystem to develop and groom to lead such an responsible AI agenda. Tridib, Sanjay, would like to get your final concluding thoughts on this topic. Maybe we'll start with Sanjay.
Yeah. So I think so. Haryyaksha has actually, given a very quite a detailed, steps as to how to get started. And I think so. Just I will add on to that particular thing. Is that something that we typically follow? Is that before we even think of, where we need to put in an AI, whether it's going to be responsible, understanding of the business process. So I will just give you that. You need to understand what is the exact objective for which you are building this entire AI machinery. So for example, now we have what is called an underwriting. So over there, so typically a lot of applications will come in and we will say that whether this particular policy needs to be underwritten or not, and it goes for a manual assessment. Now over here, the threat levels. So for every specific business process, we have kind of, created these threat levels, which says that if I go towards a fully autonomous AI model, and if it goes wrong, what is the kind of, impact that can happen? So for example, if I say in underwriting, I can actually start rejecting more number of policies because of the certain changes in the data that is happening and so forth. And I might start losing revenue. But at the same point, we can actually let go of onboard a higher risk. So over there, our threat assessment level is high. So what we have is a human in the loop kind of a scenario, wherein while the AI model decides which particular application should be going to which kind of underwriting, and what is the kind of underwriting level that should be applied for a manual underwriter. But there are, at the same point, on the contrary, there are certain functions which kind of tells you that how do you optimize your effort for renewal correction. So we have a big customer base, and you have to reach out to them and kind of talk to them that your upcoming due is happening. So over there, I might my threat level is that if I even go loss, in the sense that we go a little wrong here and there, you might just end up giving an additional call to a customer. So you say that if an X person would have been a high risk, he might not pay up. So typically we do 2 calls and they're going to have 3 calls now. So there's a little cost and there will be a little, customer experience will go a little back. So I'm just giving 2 extreme scenarios. So essentially the idea is that when you have to get started on this particular thing, go and have a check on all your business processes, do that mapping of in terms of threat assessment, where you can have a completely AI solution, and where you will have a human in a loop kind of a scenario, wherein that these are the important things and you have to be responsible. Second, if you go wrong, there are huge repercussions both in terms of media as well as business impact. So the idea would be that do that human in the loop with a complete hands to the human, which can actually go and override. So even in our case, like if I am sending a particular policy from manual underwriting and he doesn't find out any kind of a threat level and he faced, so he kind of manually passes that policy and that feedback comes to us. So that tomorrow when you're retraining your models and the entire thing, we pass on that information as well. But so that's the idea that I would want to add on to what my all the co-panelists have said.
Sure. Tridib, would you like to add a few points?
No, I think Haryyaksha and Sanjay pretty much covered all the dimensions. I just want to highlight one thing. I guess a couple of things as an organization point of view. First of all, the value system of the organization, because as I think Manoj said that it's an enabler, right? And the value system decides, right? How this enabler actually used for the product or organizational perspective, right? So we need to have a proper value system where the responsibility is kind of inbuilt, right, across stakeholders, number one. And number two is from an AI project creation point of view, it has to be a cross-functional team. It can't be a siloed team where it's only being run by the AI or the data scientist, but it has to be, as Sanjay pointed out, that the understanding of the entire business process, right, is important. So, and that can only happen when a data scientist is part of a broader, team ecosystem kind of a thing, right? And so that awareness is there, and that if something goes wrong, what is at stake is very much understood. So, yeah, I mean, that's one thing I just want to re-highlight rather than add.
Sure.
Great.
Right.
I wanted to add something over here. See, the key takeaway should be, coming up with a governance framework. Okay, we should just have governance framework. Take two simple steps. First is that your decisions made by AI should be explainable, transparent, and fair. That should be your first principle. And second is that it should be human-centric. I mean, it should be able to keep humans, or rather people's interest, safety, and well-being. Just giving you an example, for example, you just take a trust test, okay? A trust test that, okay, if you develop an autonomous car and you have two positions, one is to sit inside the autonomous car and another one is crossing the road. Now, if your autonomous car, which has relatively lower crash ratings, it is not as safe and does not have safety bags, you're sitting inside in the front seat, an autonomous car is being driven by the AI. Would you trust it or not? And if you're on the road, if you're crossing the road and there's someone who's created, and it could be your AI engineer who has created, and you're crossing the road, would you trust that car while crossing the road? So these are the two things which you can take as a trust example, and then decide that, okay, do you really want responsible AI or not? Because AI, for that matter, would see a human or an object and will try to stop. But then when it identifies that, okay, could it be a tree? Could it be human? Could it be an old age human? Could it be a young children? Anything. So it has to then have that responsible set, or rather I would say governance framework built into it, so that it understands your trust factor. The only thing which we should be focusing on is that, okay, at the end of the day, your whatever you have developed, whatever AI you have developed, it is doing the part which you would be actually trusting it at the end of the day or not. You have, I mean, just to sum it up, you have something called democracy, you have autocracy. Let's have cyberocracy as well, so that you are actually trying to have governance in and around cybersecurity as well, and that is where your responsible AI will fall in.
Great. Thank you so much to everyone for such engaging and insightful conversation. Just wanted to check with Kavya if there is any other audience question.
No, Rahul, no questions as yet.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks once again for being part of this engaging discussion, and thank you, Kamikaze, for organizing such session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.